Thanks everybody for being here for the MDA Committee Orientation. We very much appreciate your taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here with us this evening. We will be recording it so that if there are any new committee members or any additional people who would like to view the webinar, we will have it available to you online. Hopefully that won't result in a lot of people hanging up with that news. We're going to be talking today a little bit about the basics of the Michigan Dental Association and our committees. We'll be talking about organization of the association, some overview of our strategic plan, some legal aspects of volunteer service, governance, a little bit more about committees in specific, and then, of course, some leadership resources. So I do have a PowerPoint presentation. It's about 30 slides long. Won't take a tremendous amount of time, but I will go ahead and share my screen now. I'm going to suggest that if you have a question, you may use the Q&A section to post your question, and Jennifer Lenneman, who's assisting me, will try to flag it for me if I don't see that there is a question. So that we can get those answered in real time. So feel free to ask questions. Okay, let's get started talking about organization. A little bit about the Michigan Dental Association. Many of you may be aware that our House of Delegates is comprised of 102 delegates. They are coming from 12 different regions and 26 component dental societies. The responsibility of our House of Delegates is to approve advisory resolutions. They have oversight of all our MDA bylaws. They also elect the Board of Trustees and our ADA House of Delegates delegation. The House of Delegates has several committees, including a nominating committee, which has one representative per region, so 12 individuals. The Bylaws Language Review Committee, our Reference Committee, and the Committee on Credentials, Rules, and Order. Our Board of Trustees has 6 officers, and you can see them before you, as well as 9 at-large trustees. As the Executive Director, I serve as a non-voting member of the Board of Trustees. And the board has 16 standing committees, as well as 5 board committees. The board committees are made up primarily of board members. Standing committees are committees like Continuing Education, Membership, New Dentist Committee, that are made up substantially of MDA member dentists. The board's responsibility is to set policy, budget, and dues, and they also employ me as the CEO Executive Director. You can see on the slide before you what my responsibilities are as the Executive Director. I'm a non-voting member of the board and the Executive Committee. I serve as the Secretary of our for-profit subsidiary and as a consultant to our foundation and the PAC. And I'm an ex officio member of all MDA committees. I oversee the staff and supervise the budget development, ensure appropriate risk management, and represent the MDA in all our dealings. So you can see when it comes to the day-to-day activities, it's my responsibility to kind of keep the wheels on the bus and the bus working to go in the right direction. The final bullet you see is overseeing the strategic planning process and reporting on the progress on the strategic plan. So our board recently did an update. You can see that our strategic plan is about a 4-year plan, and at about the halfway mark, the board took a look at our strategic plan and identified a number of objectives that had been met or needed to be updated. So I'm giving you kind of an update on where we are with our strategic plan. And for you as a committee chair or a committee member, the important thing, I think, is for you to see that the work that you do on your committee is very likely to have a substantial impact or have a home within our MDA strategic plan. So as we move forward, we can see that there are 4 goals. Those goals are broad and far-reaching, and they don't generally change a great deal. And you can see that membership goal number 1 is to deliver exceptional member value. Very unlikely that we would say, hey, we're done delivering exceptional member value. But you can see that in order to satisfy our members and try to see them be very happy with the Michigan Dental Association and the value that they receive, we have 3 main strategies. One relates to continuing education, one relates to practice management resources, and the third one is the way we position the profession and the Michigan Dental Association and its members with legislators and the public. And you can see that many of our committees line up with this member value goal. Our second goal is to increase membership participation, and we have 2 main measures. Where the previous measure was primarily value and satisfaction, in this case it's actually numbers. So we're looking to see that our member retention rate for our active members will be 96% or better. Many associations see a lot more churn than dentistry does. We definitely have some dental societies within the tripartite that have more of a 93, 92, 94 retention rate. Our retention rate, we look to see 96% or better every year. And you can see that there are 2 main strategies for doing that. One is to make sure that when the people who are coming through our reduced dues program, we want to see them continue throughout the entire course. And then the other is to deliver personal member service. While we're doing that, our objective 3 is to maintain the number of full dues paying members as well as an active market share of 75% or more. That means for everyone practicing in the state of Michigan, we want at least 3 out of 4 to be MDA members. And you can see the focus here is on our large components, our underrepresented segments. And then we've also found that if you did not go to dental school here in Michigan, you're less likely to be a member. So we're actually making a focus on that group as well. Moving on to our finance goal, the important part is to make sure that our organization, the Michigan Dental Association, is sustainable in the long run. And the related objective has to do with our budget process. We want to make sure that our annual budget adequately supports the strategic plan. We also encourage a surplus budget, but do not require it. So you can see that the way we're going about that is through periodic small increases in dues rather than no dues increases at all and then potentially a big hit. Big focus on non-dues revenue, and then we want to make sure that we maintain positive investment returns compared to benchmarks. Finally, we're looking at an organizational goal. Just like finance, where we want to be financially sustainable, we want to make sure that the Michigan Dental Association's capacity is also sustainable. We want to be sufficient to meet the net needs of all the MDA members that we have. So objective 5 focuses specifically on the component dental societies. We want to make sure that we can help our component societies prepare and have tomorrow's component leaders in the pipeline, as well as well-prepared current leaders. And then we want to make sure that we have a support structure in place to help our component societies increase active member engagement. Active member engagement means that the members pay attention to what's going on in the organization. They go to meetings, they read their newsletters or emails. They have a strong, vibrant professional community. And then finally, our final organizational goal and objective is to enhance the processes that support the MDA's strategic focus and our ability to effectively implement our strategy. This goal or objective actually has kind of 2 sides. One is on volunteer leadership, in other words, enhancing the work of the Board of Trustees, and secondly, staff capabilities. Within our existing team, We want to continually improve and deliver better service to our members, provide a positive professional experience, and make sure that we are functioning to the best of our ability, or even higher, as I like to say. So that's our strategic plan, and you can see that within it there's a lot of opportunity for committees to play a strong role in helping move the association forward. So let's move on. Talk a little bit about you as a volunteer leader. You know, as a volunteer, you have a fiduciary responsibility to the Michigan Dental Association. But what does that really mean? You know, it comes from the Latin fiducia, which means trust. So it's a person who has the power or obligation to act for another under circumstances which require trust, good faith, and honesty. So as a committee member, you have a position of trust. Your fellow members are putting their trust in you to look out for their best interests and for their organization. So what are those fiduciary responsibilities that volunteers have? There are three main responsibilities. One is the duty of care. The duty of care basically says that you will be an active participant in your committee, that you will act in the best interests of the association and act in a fiscally responsible manner. So I have a couple of little questions here that might spark your thinking about what does it really mean to have that duty of care. You know, you put forward as a committee, you will be putting forward recommendations for the board to consider. And if you have done your duty of care, it's the board's responsibility to recognize the work that you have done. And although they bring a larger context to the discussion, they're not there to do committee work. It's expected that they will trust the work of the committee and make sure that their consideration of the ideas that you bring forward is thorough and responsible. The second question is, I've heard many people say, oh gosh, I don't know, I don't really like numbers, I'm not that good with money. How is it up to me to be fiscally responsible? Can I really be fiscally responsible? And the question here is, what should you do if you don't understand all the financial details? And the good news is that duty of care does not require you to be a financial whiz kid. It only requires you to bring your best efforts to bear and to behave and consider the information put before you as any reasonable person would. So there are people on the different committees and on the board who are very knowledgeable about finance. It is definitely something that there is a lot of volunteer oversight. So you should not be nervous if you're looking at things and feel like you don't know everything. If you ask good questions and make an effort to understand, I'm sure you'll be fine. The next duty is the duty of loyalty, and this really comes down a lot to conflict of interest. As a committee member or any volunteer, really, you have a duty to avoid a conflict of interest as much as possible, a duty to identify potential conflicts of interest, and as well a duty to disclose them. So those three things all come as part of your duty of loyalty around conflict of interest. And a question would be, what is a conflict of interest? You know, many people feel that unless money is changing hands, there's no conflict of interest. But probably one of the most common kinds of conflicts are divided loyalties. And question one relates to that. It says, why do you think some volunteers may not recognize possible conflicts of interest? And a lot of it is because people think that they can segregate in their mind, or they can decide that two organizations have the same end goal. Therefore, it doesn't matter if you are thinking about what one company, association, group wants when you're doing the work for a second group. But when it comes to the Michigan Dental Association, you should be putting the MDA first. And if there's any possible conflict, whether it's with a specialty organization, a vendor, a company you're involved with, some organization that perhaps underwrites speakers or things like that, always better to over-disclose. Then the second part of the duty of loyalty has to do with the duty of confidentiality. The information that you receive as a committee member, often you are receiving information that is not readily available to the typical layperson or even to a general member. You will be privy to a lot of background information, business information that you will be using to make decisions as a committee or make recommendations for the board. So you have a responsibility to keep confidential material confidential. Very rarely you will have the opportunity to potentially have a discussion in executive session, or might make decisions that are done in executive session because they need to be embargoed for a period of time. And in that case, the information is held in the strictest confidence. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit further in the slide presentation. Finally, the duty of obedience. That duty of obedience has to do with living up to our bylaws, living up to our mission of helping member dentists succeed. You need to act in accordance with governing documents, as well as the MDA mission, vision, and core values. Policy is also something. We have specific policies that have been approved by the Michigan Dental Association, and it's important for all our volunteers to abide by the policies that we have set in place. It's also important that you support the decisions that the committee brings forward and ultimately the decisions that the board makes, and don't undermine decisions. What you may see in some other organizations, maybe it's your condo board or your homeowners association, your PTA or some other organization or group, is that when a group makes a decision, there is a minority that disagrees, and instead of supporting the decision and going along with it, they actively begin to try and work against it or undermine that decision. That's not best governance, and it certainly isn't a part of the duty of obedience. That being said, it's not true that just because something is policy, you can never question it. The question I have here is, when is it appropriate for a member to suggest reconsideration of a committee decision? Generally, not at the same meeting. Unless for some reason you've done a little bit more research, you have a little bit more information, but ultimately it's up to the committee to make a decision. And with the passage of time, new information or new circumstances, you might choose as a group to reconsider a previous decision. But that doesn't mean that you should be working towards that reconsideration from the moment that the action is taken. So hopefully that's clear to you. Now I'm going to pause for a second here just to make sure if anyone has any questions. I don't see anything up here with the Q&A, so I'm going to encourage you, if you do have a question, please feel free to put it in there. We have enough people on the call that I really can't call upon people to do their questions verbally. So I want to encourage you to use that functionality, but only if you want to. I'm not requiring questions, right? So let's move on from the fiduciary responsibilities, talk a little bit more about a couple of other legal issues. One is the issue of attorney-client privilege. as a committee member, it would be fairly rare for your committee to seek advice from the MDA attorney. But I would never say that it could never happen. And it's always a good idea as a volunteer for you to understand how attorney-client privilege works. You know, just because you have an attorney in the room does not automatically make the conversation attorney-client. You need to be actually seeking advice from an attorney. If that is the case, then disclosure cannot be compelled. In other words, that information will be held strictly confidential. However, in order to maintain the privilege of not having it be discoverable in a lawsuit or other legal setting, it must remain confidential. So if you ever have a situation where where an attorney-client discussion happens and subsequently someone shares information from that discussion, once the privilege has been broken, then that disclosure can be compelled. So the question here is, with whom can you discuss a topic that was addressed in an attorney-client session? Only with the people who were in the room at the time. So that is makes it very clear, and it has to be the only people in the room have to be people who are directly related to it. So, for example, if a committee was talking with an attorney about something, that committee, all the committee members would be in there. Your committee director would be there, your main staff support person, but other staff would be excused, and very likely consultants would be excused as well. So hopefully that is pretty clear in terms of attorney-client. The other legal issue that is very important, especially for associations, is antitrust. Very often, back in the day, when managed care first came in, for example, I would go to a meeting and the docs would be talking about the challenges associated with managed care, and inevitably someone would make a suggestion that they band together as a group to do something that would have an impact on this managed care company. So two or more, and that's the very definition of antitrust is when two or more independent dentists or entities are engaging in a joint activity. Hey, everybody, let's get together and do this. The joint activity must restrain competition. Now, some of it is like illegal on the face of it, or illegal from the standpoint of a reasonable person could infer that it would have anti-competitive impact. The scary thing about antitrust is that it can be enforced in so many ways. You know, the Justice Department can bring a suit. The Federal Trade Commission can bring a suit and charges, or suits can be brought by private parties. And you may be aware that there are a number of lawsuits going on that were antitrust related to the dental supply companies, the big three. And there are various lawsuits going on in various phases at this point in time. So the question here for discussion and thought was, can two dentists in the same practice be guilty of antitrust? The answer would be yes, of course they can be if they are partners and have shared risk and it's a single entity, then probably not antitrust. However, if they are independent and one of them is an independent contractor or they're just sharing space, it's perfectly possible for two dentists in the same practice to be guilty of antitrust or to have a lawsuit brought for antitrust. So we watch out for that very, very diligently, because there has been time in the past where the American Dental Association was in court defending the tripartite from antitrust charges. So It's been decades, but it did happen. So moving on, let's talk a little bit more about conflict of interest. You know, these are, we do have a policy for the Michigan Dental Association. If you are new on your committee, you'll be asked to review the policy and sign a form, and I believe the form we actually ask for every year. This can be related to your own conflict, or perhaps you have a close family member who has a conflict. Maybe an employment situation or investments, or just some kind of loyalty relationship. So that may be a conflict of interest. We make a point of saying that it's important that you use the information you gain as a committee member for the good of the association, not for personal gain or advantage or to the detriment of the MDA. You certainly don't want to use your own position for personal gain or advantage or the detriment of the Michigan Dental Association, or using or disclosing any non-public, confidential, or proprietary information. So on the form, you're going to be asked to consider these issues, disclose any conflicts you may have, and kind of attest that you will abide by the policy. Key questions that you might think about is, you know, is it a known conflict or a perceived conflict? As I said, if someone might think it's a conflict, better to disclose. What are personal or professional interests? Is it possible that you have an interest that you should disclose and it's not financial in nature? What is personal gain or advantage? Again, it's not always money. What is detriment to the MDA? This is one that I think is very interesting because what is to the detriment of the MDA? It's when you use information or talk in a way to damage the reputation of the association or to impinge upon the successful completion of our mission here, right? And then using or disclosing information. Probably the most common thing that we see when it comes to confidentiality is assuming it's okay to discuss with people because they seem to be kind of in the know. So it's always better to be more cautious as opposed to more open when it comes to confidential or proprietary information. So let's talk a little bit then about good governance. Here are the core values of the Michigan Dental Association. You know, we stand for positive ethical standards. We embrace proactivity as opposed to reactivity. We're trying to be out in front. We have a culture that is dedicated to openness and a commitment to transparency, and recognize, of course, that when it comes to who are we serving, who owns the MDA, it's really our members. The members are the people who pay their dues and form our association. All our trustees are fiduciary to the Michigan Dental Association, not their component society, a specialty society, or any other group. And we make a point to recognize diversity in perspective and points of view. It makes for a much better situation when it comes to decision making. And then it's important that whatever we do, we verify that the results that we get from our actions align with MDA policy and with the strategic plan. Little discussion here of diversity and inclusion. If you've been on a committee for a while, you know that the MDA endeavors to make sure that every committee is diverse from the standpoint of point of view, experience of the people who are on there, gender, age, racial, ethnic background. It's important to have a wide variety of perspectives on any particular committee and also on the board, needless to say. And the question we would ask is, people often don't know the difference between diversity and inclusion because they feel like the same thing or two sides of the same coin. But diversity is really more about, do we have representation? Is the group, when you look at them one at a time, in other words, it's really kind of about the numbers, counting everything up. Inclusion is more about, does everyone count? Does everyone have a voice? Does everyone have the opportunity, equal opportunity to contribute to the discussion and help in the decision making? So you can see that while they are related, the two things are not identical. And the benefits, of course, to diversity and inclusion is ultimately better decision making. It's very difficult to rely on conventional wisdom when what you have is a group that don't agree on each and every thought. So the benefits are thorough discussion, knowing that you have turned over the issues in every way possible. When you look at the different styles of the committee members, some people have strengths where they're more analytical, some people are more intuitive, but when they bring their strengths to the table, you can be more sure that you've examined all sides of an issue before you render a decision or make a recommendation. The challenges for diversity and inclusion, though, are that because you are not in 100% agreement on your assumptions, and that there is that opportunity to have a more thorough discussion. So the challenges is to let it be, let disagreements be enriching as opposed to causing conflict. I would say here at the Michigan Dental Association, we continue to make progress in terms of diversity and inclusion. And as the profession becomes less homogeneous, there's certainly more ways to practice these days than there ever were before. We have very diverse from the standpoint of demographics, and many people bring very rich backgrounds to it, that the Michigan Dental Association is starting to see progress in moving forward and reaping the benefits of diversity and inclusion. So let's talk just for a second, barriers to good decisions. These are things that diversity and inclusion kind of works against. These barriers include conventional wisdom, which is like, well, it's always been this way, or we all agree. Conventional wisdom, it's kind of like the unexamined thought is conventional wisdom. Confirmation bias is a barrier where the facts that support what you want tend to be more reliable than facts that do not support what you want. So confirmation bias is where you subconsciously cherry pick the information that is coming your way. Groupthink is something that I think we've all seen at one time or another, where the pressure from the committee itself to have a positive relationship kind of encourages people to come to consensus early. So groupthink is definitely a real thing in committees. Time pressure, I think, is maybe the number one, where you only have so much time, you have a lot of facts to review, a lot of decisions to make, and instead of saying, we will want to table this for next time because we need more time or we need more information, you may decide subconsciously to make a hasty decision. Micromanagement is another barrier where instead of setting the broad recommendation and letting staff implement, you get down into the weeds too much as a volunteer organization and end up working at a very low level instead of at a more strategic level. And then finally, probably the most corrosive kind of barrier to good decisions are politics or cliques, you know, and you see that happen if there's like a pre-meeting meeting or people who are looking for allies even before the decision is discussed or the report is reviewed. They've made up their mind and they're looking for allies to get to a particular endpoint, which is what they want to see. So hopefully you will not see any of these, but they're not uncommon, and it's good to kind of have them in mind so that if it does come up, you can say, hey, I think we're succumbing to groupthink here. Let's talk about this in another way. Okay, so now we're going to move on specifically to talking a little bit about the things that were in the committee operating manual, and you should have received an email that introduced the committee operating manual to you. This slide tells you kind of the hierarchy of governance. Obviously, the first thing we need to do is follow the law, right? Can't do anything illegal here. The next level down is bylaws. Everything we do has to be in accordance with the Michigan Dental Association bylaws. Then we have our manuals. Things like the committee operating manual would come in here as number 3. Number 4, board actions. And then finally, the very lowest level of governance is if you don't have anything in the law, the bylaws, the manuals, or board policy, then you rely upon parliamentary procedure to help you to help you make the decisions that you need to make. When it comes to the committees and the relationship with the Board of Trustees, the committees in general are advisory to the board. You will receive a copy of the scope for your committee, and every one of those scopes addresses the composition, purpose, authority, and charges for your committee. You as a committee can bring forward ideas within your scope for the Board of Trustees consideration at any time. And we also have the opportunity for committee members may be tasked to serve as an official representative of the MDA if it is designated within the policy. So, and the last thing I'd want to say is that we do have staff. We are fortunate enough at the MDA to have staff to support every committee, but the staff do have multiple responsibilities. So we want to make sure that if there are things that you would like to have staff undertake, that this is a recommendation from the committee, and if you want to ask staff to do something related or unrelated to the committee, if it's not clearly within the scope of them overseeing the administration of your committee, if you want to ask them to do an extra project or something like that, I'd appreciate it if you would run that by me as well. Talking about committee and board relations, your committee might have a board liaison. You know, when we had the new governance pass, and then we subsequently did a review and kind of streamlining of our committees, one of the things that went by the wayside is the idea that every committee should have a board liaison. At this point in time, your committee may have a board liaison. That may be because there is a board member with a specific interest in your committee, or you may have felt at one point or another that it would be in the best interest of your committee to have background information from a board member. So we do have several committees that have a board liaison. but not every committee. So it is our hope that the committee chairs will engage with the board and will come at least once a year to attend and present at the board meeting where they have business before the board. Committee members are encouraged to attend when they have reports or recommendations that they're taking to the board. And just a reminder to you is that while the board gives full weight to everything that the committee brings forward, the board does have the ability to, based on your recommendation, approve, revise, refer, postpone, or even just say, yeah, we're not going to do that. So the board isn't there to do committee work, but they also have a broader perspective than the committee does. So they have the ability to kind of prioritize and see things with a little bit broader point of view. Now, one thing that I have not, that I didn't mention that I would like to, is that there is definitely times when the scope of your committee delegates specific authority. So, for example, the Public Relations Committee is delegated the specific authority to kind of oversee and review the metrics and progress of our public awareness campaign. The CE Committee is delegated the responsibility to develop a roster of continuing education programs within the established budget. And you can see that that would be very awkward if every speaker who got booked had to be approved by the board. On the other hand, for the Committee on Government and Insurance Affairs, they make recommendations to the board because of the high level of responsibility and strategy associated with it. And I would say that with that particular committee, the board generally follows the advice of the CGIA, but it's not 100% of the time. You may wonder, well, what about the budget associated with my committee? Our finances, the budget is a calendar year budget. It starts in the spring, so we are knee-deep in it right now and is finalized in September. The committee input into the MDA budget is encouraged, and that will happen through your staff director. The board is responsible for all financial management, budget, and dues. So the proposed budget that comes forward through a particular area of the MDA may be approved as it comes forward. It may be revised. And when it comes to, let's say your committee really feels strongly that the MDA should do something that has not been currently budgeted, I would like to make sure that you know that the committee can bring a recommendation for action by the board or the EC if it is a time-sensitive thing through contingency funding or funding through the reserves. Every year the board usually has not very much money that they allocate, but it's an unusual year where they do not have to allocate a little bit of money for something that was not seen at the time of developing the budget. So that's it for finances. I'm at the point where I'm going to be talking briefly about the leadership resources that are available to you as a committee member. So I want to once again invite you, if you have a question, to put it into the Q&A section. I don't see that there are any, but making sure you know you're welcome to do so. All right, well, we're coming into the home stretch and doing great on time, so hopefully we'll be able to get you out of here even a couple minutes early. Let's talk about leadership resources. Leadership Central is a special section on the MDA website. You can see here, michigandental.org/leadership-central is kind of your online resource. You, of course, are already committee members, but it has a place there where you can send friends and colleagues if they'd like to get involved. It also offers a number of links to resources that can help you gain leadership skills. You can review actions of the board and committees as well, and have a better understanding of how the entire MDA governance system works just through information that's available there. This is our intake for volunteer interest. We actually have a form that's very easy to fill out, which is why it's great if you know someone who wants to get more involved. And they can indicate their time that they have available, their interests, what they're interested in, and also if they are up for getting involved at the component level, perhaps with the foundation or our for-profit subsidiary or the PAC. So Jennifer Lenneman, who's helping me with this webinar today, actually monitors Leadership Central and the volunteer interest forms and does the follow-up because we do try very hard to make sure that everyone who wants to become a volunteer leader has the opportunity to do so. Leadership Forum, I don't know how many of you who've been on the call. We've done 2 leadership forums already, and they've been very well rated. One of the things that our EC, who oversees leadership development here at the MDA, wanted to see was a larger number of people, more people getting the opportunity to enhance their skills and kind of maybe put this a little bit on steroids, right? Make it a little bit bigger deal and a little bit more bustling activity. And the way to do that, of course, is to make it free. So the Leadership Forum, we're seeking sponsorship funding, and we've got a good level of commitment already. And as a result, that means that committee members, House members, or even just people who would like to get more involved with organized dentistry can register for the Leadership Forum and come. You can see the date, Friday, September 27th, and it's about 5.5 hours of continuing education. We have 3 tracks, great speakers, and the registration is open now. So I will tell you, at $0, we are promoting this to current volunteers before we open it up because I don't want to turn away anyone who is already contributing to the success of the organization as a volunteer. So I hope you'll think about coming and joining us in September. Looking about your committee particular, committee scopes I mentioned, committees are consistent in composition in general. There are some exceptions. Consultants are on the basis of needed expertise or perspective, and the committee purpose is primarily to assist the board. As I mentioned, authority is usually advisory. Some committees have delegated responsibilities, and the duties are those ongoing responsibilities that your committee has year over year. Charges are what the board has asked you to do this particular year. So your committee staff director will go over your scope with you at your first meeting for the year. Subcommittees, just to let you know, a committee chair may appoint subcommittees if needed. There's no approval required for that. Committee members and approved consultants may serve on any subcommittees that the committee chair deems necessary. If you need additional MDA members or others on a subcommittee, those folks can be added with the approval of the MDA president. And of course, you all know that our current president, as of early May, is Dr. Margaret Gingrich. The committee must review and approve any subcommittee recommendation if it before it goes to the board. So let's imagine you have a subcommittee that's working on some kind of a new experience for annual session, or you've got a subcommittee on access that's looking specifically at elder care. The subcommittee can't send that recommendation directly to the board. It needs to go through the committee as a whole and come up that way. So just to let you know, there is limit to the subcommittee's authority in that way. And subcommittees would expire at the end of the leadership year or when the work is complete. So, for example, let's imagine that there was a subcommittee for the membership committee or the member success committee that did not complete its work before MDA's annual session. That subcommittee may continue into the next year simply through reappointment. If, on the other hand, the work has been completed and there is no need for that subcommittee, you don't have to take any formal action to end the subcommittee. It would expire naturally at the end of the leadership year. So that is our 35th slide. As I said, the goal of this orientation webinar is to allow the committee chairs and the new committee members to have kind of a good grounding when they go into their first committee meeting of the year. That first committee meeting of the year, you'll also be reviewing your scope, and hopefully, if you're a committee chair, you will have already spoken to your staff person and had the opportunity to discuss and review that in advance. Is there a copy of the slides available? The answer is yes. We will make these slides available, and in addition, this webinar is being archived. So if you have a yearning to watch the entire 50-minute program again, you can. In the meantime, I'll make sure. That was Jill Breon from Annual Session who asked that question, and I will make sure that all the directors have a copy of the slides so you can get it as well. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Knudsen, for your comment. I appreciate it. All right. Have a wonderful night, everybody.